In 52 BCE, the most brilliant military mind in history made a decision that looked like absolute suicide. Julius Caesar ordered 50,000 Roman soldiers to build their own tomb. He commanded them to construct a wall to trap 80,000 enemies inside a fortress, and then here is the insane part. He ordered them to build a second wall behind their backs to hold off 250,000 more enemies approaching from the outside. Think about that for a second. 50,000 men voluntarily locking themselves in a donut of death, sandwiched between nearly 350,000 screaming warriors who wanted nothing more than to peel the skin off every Roman they could find. This wasn't just a battle, it was a gamble with the fate of Western civilization on the table. If Caesar lost, Rome would fall, and history, as we know it, would be erased. But Caesar didn't just plan to survive, he planned to turn this death trap into the deadliest meat grinder the ancient world had ever seen. He was about to unleash engineering horrors that would make nightmares look tame, hidden pits, iron spikes, and walls of death designed to butcher men by the thousands. But why? Why would a genius commander bury himself alive? How do you feed an army that is trapped inside its own siege? And what was the secret weapon that allowed Caesar to break the spirit of a united nation? By the end of this video, you will see the exact moment when Caesar looked death in the eye and laughed. Get ready, because the Siege of Alesia is about to rewrite your definition of impossible. To understand this madness, you have to look at the man standing on the other side of the wall. Vercingetorix wasn't just a barbarian warlord, he was the first man to unite the impossible. The Gallic tribes had spent centuries killing each other, but Vercingetorix convinced them that hating Rome was more important than hating their neighbors. He forged a confederation of 40 tribes, an ocean of warriors stretching from the Atlantic to the Rhine. He retreated to Alesia, a fortress sitting on a high plateau, a natural stronghold that looked unbreakable. He gathered 80,000 of his best men there, thinking he was safe. He thought Caesar would never dare to attack such a position. He was wrong. Caesar didn't attack, he suffocated. Caesar arrived with 10 legions, 50,000 professional killers, and 10,000 German cavalry mercenaries who were just as savage as the Gauls. But instead of storming the hill and dying in droves, Caesar ordered his men to dig. They dug trenches 15 feet wide, they built ramparts 12 feet high, they constructed towers every 80 feet. In just 3 weeks, they built an 11-mile wall encircling the entire fortress. Vercingetorix was trapped, but Vercingetorix had one card left to play. Before the trap snapped shut, he sent his cavalry out to summon relief. He called for every able-bodied man in Gaul to come to Alesia, and they answered. A relief army of 250,000 warriors was marching to crush Caesar against his own walls. Caesar knew they were coming. Most generals would have run. Caesar stayed. He ordered his men to turn around and build a second wall facing outward, 14 miles long. He was now the meat in a sandwich of violence. The engineering Caesar deployed was pure, calculated sadism. Between the two walls, he created a zone of absolute terror. He ordered the digging of lilies, pits 3 feet deep with sharpened stakes at the bottom covered with brush. Step on one and your foot is impaled. Fall into one and you are gutted. In front of those he planted stimuli, iron hooks buried in the ground to tear open ankles and rip tendons. And closest to the walls he placed cipi, massive logs with sharpened branches that looked like giant tombstones designed to break the momentum of any charge. Inside Alesia, things were getting desperate. 80,000 soldiers plus the civilian population were starving. Vercingetorix made a brutal decision. He expelled the women, children, and elderly from the fortress, hoping Caesar would let them pass or feed them. Caesar did neither. He let them starve to death in the no-man's land between the walls, right in front of their husbands and fathers on the ramparts. It was a cold-blooded message. There is no mercy here. Then the relief army arrived. The ground shook as 250,000 Gauls appeared on the horizon. The noise was deafening, war horns, screaming warriors, banging shields. For the Romans trapped in their thin strip of land, it must have felt like the apocalypse had arrived. They were outnumbered, 7-1. There was no way out. The only way home was through the enemy. The first assault was a test of nerves. The relief army attacked the outer wall while Vercingetorix stormed the inner wall. The Romans were fighting back to back. Arrows darkened the sky, literally. The Romans fired nearly 100,000 arrows an hour. The noise of battle was so loud that orders couldn't be heard. Soldiers fought on instinct and drill. But Caesar's death traps worked. The charging Gauls hit the hidden pits and iron spikes. Screams of agony replaced war cries as men were impaled on invisible stakes. But the sheer weight of numbers was terrifying. The Gauls were climbing over the bodies of their dead comrades to reach the walls. At night, the horror intensified. Fighting in pitch blackness, Romans stabbed at shapes in the dark, slipping on blood and mud. The lines were bending. Exhaustion was setting in. A soldier can only fight for so long before his arms give out. And then the crisis point hit. Vercassivelaunus, a cousin of Vercingetorix, found a weak spot in the Roman outer wall, a section where the terrain made the wall lower than usual. He threw 60,000 men at that one point. At the same time, Vercingetorix launched a massive assault from the inside. The Romans were breaking. Labienus, Caesar's second in command, sent a desperate message: "We cannot hold." This was the moment, the hinge of history. If that wall broke, 50,000 Romans would be slaughtered. Caesar's head would end up on a pike, and Rome would crumble. Caesar didn't panic. He grabbed his scarlet cloak, the distinctive purple-red garment of a commander, so his men could see him. He gathered just 13 cohorts, maybe 6,000 men, and rode personally into the fray. He didn't just send orders, he became the weapon. The sight of Caesar himself riding into the jaws of death electrified his exhausted troops. "Caesar is here!" the cry went down the line. Men who were ready to collapse found one last reserve of strength. At the same time, Caesar ordered his German cavalry to ride out of a distant gate, circle the entire battlefield, and hit the Gauls from behind. It was a hammer and anvil strike of perfection. The German cavalry smashed into the rear of the Gallic relief army just as Caesar hit them from the front. The Gauls, pressed against the Roman wall and now attacked from behind, panicked. The slaughter was absolute. 60,000 Gauls were cut down in hours. The rest broke and fled. The relief army, the massive ocean of warriors that was supposed to save Gaul, dissolved into a chaotic mob running for their lives. From the high walls of Alesia, Vercingetorix watched his hope die. He saw the relief army, his last chance, scatter like dust in the wind. The silence that fell over the fortress was heavier than the roar of battle. He knew it was over. His people were starving, his allies were gone, and the Roman noose was tight. He called a council of chiefs and spoke words that echo through history. "I did not undertake this war for my own needs, but for the freedom of all. Since we must yield to fortune, I offer myself to you." The next day, a lone figure rode out of the gates of Alesia. Vercingetorix, dressed in his finest armor, riding a magnificent horse, he rode down the hill through the carnage of the battlefield, past the rotting bodies, straight to where Caesar sat on a folding chair. He didn't speak. He circled Caesar once, then dismounted. He took off his armor piece by piece and laid it at Caesar's feet. Then he knelt. It was the death of a nation. The proud Gallic civilization, which had terrified Rome for centuries, ended right there in the dirt. Caesar didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a word of comfort. He had Vercingetorix chained and dragged away. The king of the Gauls would spend the next 6 years rotting in a Roman dungeon before being ritually strangled during Caesar's triumph. The aftermath was industrial-scale misery. 40,000 captives were given to the Roman soldiers as slaves, one slave for every legionary. The wealth of Gaul was stripped to pay Caesar's debts, but the victory at Alesia did more than just conquer a country, it created an emperor. Caesar had achieved the impossible. He had won a battle that no other general could have won. His soldiers were now loyal to him, not to Rome. They had walked through hell with him, and they would follow him anywhere, even against Rome itself. Alesia was the turning point. It secured the Roman conquest of Gaul, which would remain Roman for 500 years. It spread Latin culture, law, and language across Europe, shaping the very world we live in today. If Caesar had lost at Alesia, French, Spanish, and Italian might not exist. The map of the world would be unrecognizable, but the cost was staggering. Historians estimate that 1 million Gauls died in Caesar's conquest, and another million were enslaved. It was a genocide by modern standards, celebrated as a triumph in Rome. Alesia stands as a monument to military genius, yes, but also to the ruthless, cold-blooded efficiency of empire building. The Siege of Alesia is a masterclass in high-stakes gambling. Caesar bet everything, his life, his army, his country, on his ability to outthink, outbuild, and outfight the world. He proved that when you are backed into a corner, you don't surrender, you build a bigger wall. He showed that the impossible is just an engineering problem waiting to be solved. But it also reminds us that history is written by the victors. We know Vercingetorix's name, but we see him through Caesar's eyes. We celebrate the tactical brilliance, but often forget the starving women and children trapped between the walls. Alesia is a story of glory and horror, inextricably linked. If you were blown away by the sheer audacity of Caesar's double wall trap, make sure to like and subscribe. We bring you the battles that shaped the world with all the blood and grit left in. What do you think? Was Caesar a genius or a madman? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, remember, fortune favors the bold, but it brutally punishes the hesitation.